Sarah wasn't looking for aliens. Stars were her usual quarry, the familiar patterns of constellations etched into her nights. But tonight, something was amiss. A signal, pulsing from deep space, its rhythm unlike anything in her database. Static-laced chirps and warbles, almost melodic. Mornings were for the tedium of grant writing, not chasing interstellar anomalies. Yet she couldn't shake the signal, its alien song looping in her head. Returning to her modest observatory that night, nestled amidst rolling cornfields, Sarah retuned the telescope, a shiver of anticipation despite herself. There. A flash in the vastness, not the steady gleam of a star, but a tumbling flicker. It was descending fast. She tracked it, adrenaline spiking, as a meteor-like streak blazed across the sky. It crashed well outside town limits, a fiery exclamation mark against the fields. Fear mingled with a scientist's relentless curiosity. By the time emergency crews arrived, Sarah had her old Jeep rattling down a dirt track, the crash site marked on her GPS. Smoke wreathed the crater, earth churned and blackened. Yet, amidst the wreckage, not the twisted metal she expected, but a shape far more extraordinary. The ship was a shattered egg, its iridescent shell glinting under the harsh floodlights, and the creatures, they were bird-like, yet so heartbreakingly fragile. Slender limbs bent at unnatural angles, feathers filmed with ash. Their large eyes held not aggression, but a soul-deep terror that transcended any language barrier. Whispers rustled from the gathered responders, fear, pity, a tremor of excitement rippling through the hardened EMPs. Sarah, though, felt a strange jolt of kinship. The aliens were as out of place here as she often felt amidst the close-knit community, drawn eternally to the mysteries beyond the horizon. "Wait!" she barked, pushing through the crowd. "Back off, give them space." The EMPs hesitated, but something in her voice held them at bay. Kneeling, Sarah met the aliens' gazes, hands open and empty. One, smaller, plumage the vibrant blue of a jay, blinked slowly, tilting its head. A tentative trill emerged, a question wrapped in a plea. Sarah felt a lump in her throat. She wasn't some seasoned first-contact expert, just an astronomer who'd stumbled upon the extraordinary. But in that moment, facing those wide, terrified eyes, a sense of quiet determination solidified within her. "You're safe," she whispered, though the words likely meant nothing. "We'll help." The world descended upon her quiet town. News vans, government agents, scientists bristling with equipment. The aliens Lirins, they called themselves, their trilling voices translated by hastily developed software, were whisked into a hastily erected medical tent. Sarah, surprisingly, was granted access. Chaos swirled, but within the tent, amidst the beeping monitors, an odd calm existed. The Lirins, perhaps sensing the genuine concern of the human doctors, had relaxed slightly. Their colors shifted subtle pulses of lilac, calming turquoise, a form of communication Sarah was beginning to decipher. Terrace, the eldest, plumage faded to a dusty gray, fixed her with a piercing amber stare. "You? Extend sanctuary? Knowing the cost." Her voice, translated by a tinny speaker, cracked with exhaustion and an undercurrent of despair that cut through the language barrier. Sarah looked at Alada, the vibrant blue one who'd first trilled at her. Fear still haunted her eyes, yet with treatment the broken bones were mending, the raw terror fading. "Cost?" Sarah shrugged, the word echoing oddly in the sterile environment. Humans had faced down plagues, tyrants, the Earth's own occasional fitful moods. "We handle difficult things." Terrace blinked slowly. An acknowledgement or a weary dismissal? It was impossible to tell. Yet, as Sarah was ushered from the tent, brushed aside by specialists with more concrete expertise, she felt not irritation, but a burning resolve. These weren't just scientific curiosities. They were souls entrusted, however haphazardly, to her care. Her town, her planet. And Sarah had never been the type to back down from a challenge. News of the Lirins leaked. It wasn't the sleek, controlled rollout governments preferred, but grainy footage from some farmer's cell phone, the creatures looking impossibly lost against a backdrop of startled cows. The world exploded. Sarah's observatory became ground zero for a bizarre siege. Conspiracy theorists with tinfoil hats planted themselves alongside wide-eyed UFO enthusiasts. Preachers ranted about divine judgment, while starry-eyed dreamers whispered of galactic brotherhood. The media descended, satellite trucks choking the lanes, their relentless spotlights turning night into a gaudy, perpetual day. All of it made her work near impossible. Terrace had been right, they knew nothing of the cost. Yet, amidst the madness, a message arrived from an unexpected source, a military attaché requesting Sarah's consultation. The base was all brusque efficiency and sterile corridors. General Thorne, a man built like an oak and just as unyielding, eyed her with a skepticism mirroring her own. "You understand these, Lirins, better than anyone," he stated bluntly. "They tell you things?" "They tell me they're terrified," Sarah corrected. "They tell me they've lost more homes than I can comprehend. And their physiology, it shares some surprising similarities with parrots." Thorne seemed unimpressed by her biology lesson. He sketched the situation. Another ship had been spotted larger, its intent chillingly clear. The Vrax, the conquerors from whom the Lirins fled, were coming. Even with Earth's quaint space defenses, they were laughably outmatched. "The question," Thorne said, his voice grim, "is whether Earth surrenders the refugees or faces annihilation for harboring them." The unbuilding was familiar from news broadcasts, yet standing within its cavernous halls was another matter. Diplomats in crisp suits milled about, their voices a tense symphony of languages overlaying the ceaseless buzz of translation devices. Sarah felt like a lone starling swept into a hurricane, her worn jeans a stark contrast to the tailored elegance around her. She'd been summoned, General Thorne at her side, to speak for the Lirins, not as a scientist, but as a witness to their plight. The faces of the assembly were a blur, tired, calculating, a few mirroring her own apprehension. Then the Vrax delegation entered. Sleek and reptilian, they exuded an icy arrogance that cut through the room. Their translator's voice dripped with disdain as he presented their demands. The fugitives were to be returned, Earth's protection an act of war. They painted the Lirins as criminals, their genocidal campaign justified. Sarah's stomach churned, less from the ornate threats than the flickering resignation on the faces of some delegates. The Vrax painted a bleak picture, submit or be destroyed. Yet a rebellious spark ignited in Sarah. It wasn't just about the Lirins now, it was a fight against accepting the inevitable, a trait deeply ingrained in her since her stargazing childhood. When her turn came, when the eyes of the world, human and otherwise, focused on her, Sarah didn't recite data. She spoke of Alara's broken wings, now healing, of Terrace's quiet recounting of worlds reduced to ash, of their colors, not symbols on a spreadsheet, but semaphore of emotions humans might only partially grasp. "They're not a threat," she concluded, her voice unsteady but with hard-won conviction. "We are, if we allow fear to make us betray our very humanity." The room erupted, a chorus of agreements, protest, and hasty translations. A decision wasn't reached that day, but a seed was planted. Humanity wouldn't roll over. Not yet. The verdict came not in a grand declaration, but a slow, uneven shift. Nations usually at odds muttered in back channels, sharing intelligence. Protests swelled, not screaming for alien contact, but fueled by a primal revulsion towards the Vrax's brutality. Earth wasn't ready to fight, not truly, but neither was it ready to cower. Sarah was pulled into an endless cycle. Strategy meetings where she was the bewildered expert on Lirin social structure, tearful appeals from refugees fearing their kin still under the Vrax yoke, debates on talk shows where she was pitted against pundits spouting apocalyptic prophecies. Through it all, a strange bond formed with Alara. The younger Lirin's colors were stronger now, edged with a determined gold. She still flinched at loud noises, but her gaze met Sarah's with a fragile trust that was more potent than any weapon. One evening, amidst the chaos, Alara beckoned Sarah, leading her to an unused corner of the quarantine zone where the Lirins resided. With a nervous glance, Alara closed her eyes and pulsed a deep, resonant sapphire. It wasn't a song, but a feeling, peace, a soothing balm against Sarah's frenzied heartbeat. Then, with startling focus, Alara shifted, the color sharpening into a discordant crimson. Sarah felt a jolt, not pain, but a prickling unease, her thoughts scattering. "It disrupts," Alara trilled, a note of grim triumph threading her voice. Our ancestors, they hid. Used this when cornered, hoping for time to flee. It was never a weapon. Sarah stared, seeing a glimmer of a far more complex history than their initial pity had evoked. No, she agreed, but it could be part of one. Can you teach others to do this? General Thorne didn't balk at the seemingly ludicrous idea. Then again, after witnessing a bird-like alien project, a mental disruption ray, perhaps ludicrous, was redefined daily. Sarah, Alara, and a handful of other Lirins chosen for their focus were secluded in a hastily converted training facility. The sessions were less meditation, more panicked experimentation. The Lirins struggled to translate the instinctive into teachable steps. Each failure, each wave of discord that made soldiers stumble and spilled coffee cups was met not with frustration, but determined fervor. Sarah, her astronomical maps replaced by whiteboard diagrams of Lirin brainwaves, became part strategist, part cheerleader. Think of it like aiming your song, she'd encourage. Not outwards, but inwards at the enemy's mind. The Vrax loomed larger each day, not in blurry telescope images, but in intercepted transmissions boasting of their merciless might. Yet, in the odd sequestered world of the training facility, fear was tempered by a desperate, absurd kind of hope. One afternoon, Terrace summoned Sarah. The elder Lirin had always been a cipher, her colors veiled in a perpetual mist of sorrow. Now a resolute emerald sparked through the gray. "We have word," Terrace rasped. Her voice had strengthened, even as the lines on her face had deepened. "Scattered pockets of our people. They resist still. Your disruptions could aid them." The request hung heavy in the air. Sending the Lirins, barely trained in their new ability, into active war zones felt perilously close to turning refugees into child soldiers. "Can you reach them?" Sarah asked, not about communications, but whether their focused discord could span the vastness of space. "If guided," Alara said, joining them, her feathers vibrant with determination. "If we are the beacon, and you amplify it." The operation was as outlandish as anything in the hastily cobbled-together manuals of intergalactic guerrilla warfare. Sarah, perched amidst a tangle of unfamiliar tech, felt more like a stage magician than a scientist. Yet, as Alara closed her eyes, a soothing pulse rippling outwards, Sarah's instruments flared to life. Guiding the signal wasn't aiming a telescope, but coaxing, shaping, infusing the Lirin's harmony with just enough interference, a calculated distortion. Days bled together, the sterile control room losing all sense of time. Sleep came in ragged snatches punctuated by Alara's sudden trills of distress, not pain, but a flickering echo of disarray mirrored by garbled Vrax transmissions. The news crackled through then, fragmented and choked with static. A Vrax supply convoy thrown into chaos, ships colliding in the darkness. A weapons depot malfunctioning, detonations ripping through a fortified base. Small victories born not from explosives, but the fragile weaponization of empathy. A knock jolted Sarah from the hazy half-sleep that passed for rest. General Thorne looked haggard, but his eyes held a grim satisfaction. Word came from the UN. 2 more systems pledged ships. Not because of our firepower, that's a joke. But they saw what we did for the Lirins. Inspired them, damn it. Hope, that dangerous, fickle thing, bloomed cautiously within Sarah. Perhaps it wasn't about winning, at least not in the way she'd once envisioned. But it was about not losing in the way everyone had expected. The inevitable retaliation came not as a grand armada, but a calculated strike. The Vrax, masters of the expected, underestimated their prey. They targeted Earth, not with warships, but by tracking the unique resonance the Lirins emitted. Sarah's sanctuary wasn't a bunker, but a field bathed in the harsh glow of Klieg lights. The Lirins were huddled together, eyes wide, their colors a kaleidoscope of terror. Alara alone pulsed defiant crimson, a beacon the Vrax couldn't ignore. Above, a lone fighter jet screamed across the sky, a pointless yet potent display of human audacity. The Vrax dropship descended, its sleek form unsettlingly beautiful against the cornfields. Warriors poured out, reptilian eyes gleaming. Sarah wasn't a soldier, yet she stood before the aliens, placing herself bodily between them and the Lirins. A futile gesture, but one the general had insisted on. "Buying time," Thorne had said, his voice grim. Every second counts. The Vrax commander, towering and adorned with trophies that made Sarah's stomach clench, raised a clawed hand. Sarah flinched, awaiting the blast of some alien weapon. Yet it never came. The Vrax warrior stumbled, then another, weapons clattering forgotten to the ground. Their reptilian eyes bulged in confusion. Sarah saw, in that moment, the advantage of their enemy's arrogance. They'd never even conceived of this form of attack. Behind her, a roar not of engines, but a communal Lirin cry projected panic spiking into ear-splitting static. The Vrax clutched at their heads, some falling to their knees. This wasn't victory, merely survival. Thorn's jet streaked overhead again, then another, their sonic booms the final blow to Vrax focus. The Lirins were evacuated, scattered into carefully planned safe houses. Sarah became part strategist, part protector, ferrying them under the cover of night with an escort of hardened soldiers surprisingly gentle with their delicate charges. It was amidst this carefully choreographed chaos that word arrived. Not of human victories, those were few and hard-won, but of something greater. The Lirins' song, amplified on distant worlds, had sparked havoc within the Vrax forces. Their relentless focus, the key to their dominance, had been shattered. The war wouldn't be won overnight. Sarah, her childhood dreams of distant stars now tainted with the acrid smell of conflict, knew that. Yet, huddled in a cramped basement with Ilara, their colors a muted swirl of shared anxiety, she glimpsed a different future. News programs, choked with battle reports, now hesitantly featured Lirin spokespeople. Their halting voices, still filled with loss, now carried an undercurrent of resolve. The galaxy still whispered of the weak ones of Earth and their strange feathered allies. But something within that phrase had shifted, a sliver of wary respect cutting through the derision. One evening, Sarah found Terrace gazing at the cramped room they now called a sanctuary. "When this began," the elder Lirin murmured, "I wished only for a place to hide, to mourn in peace. Your world. It has given us back our song, twisted though it may be." Sarah reached out, her hand hovering, then settled gently on a feathered shoulder. "Maybe," she said quietly, "that's the most powerful kind of song, the one that fights back." The turning point, when it arrived, was anticlimactic. No grand battles witnessed from orbiting satellites, no surrender broadcasted with triumphant fanfare. Instead, it was a garbled communique from a beleaguered Vrax outpost, their once boastful demands choked with desperation. They proposed a truce, not out of altruism but cold pragmatism. The war they'd envisioned as a swift extermination was bleeding them dry, their advantage in weaponry countered by the maddening, intangible disruption. The negotiations stretched for agonizing months, filled with legal wrangling and thinly veiled threats. Yet the very fact of those negotiations was a revolution. Earth hadn't just survived, it had claimed a seat at the galactic table, its voice amplified by the gentle Lirins who defied all expectations of victimhood. When the final accords were signed, Sarah didn't feel elation, but a weary relief mingled with a bone-deep sorrow for all that was lost. Earth had scars, its military bolstered, its reputation forever altered. The Lirins bore deeper wounds, their numbers decimated, a once vibrant species forever dimmed. Sarah stood on the windswept edge of her field, the observatory rebuilt. Above, the familiar tapestry of stars beckoned, but now the space between them held a new kind of echo. It wasn't the Lirin song, but the quiet hum of rebuilt communications tech. A fledgling refugee center had sprung on the nearby farmland, not just for the Lirins, but others, the persecuted, the hunted, those the galaxy deemed inconvenient. Ilara joined her, a stark silhouette against the starlit sky. "The Vrax still lurk," the younger Lirin trilled, gold flecking her midnight feathers, "and others will come, drawn to pain like scavengers." "And we'll be ready," Sarah responded, her voice rough but resolute. "Not with armies, maybe, but with open doors, and a willingness to make the impossible possible." Ilara pulsed a soft emerald, a soothing counterpoint to the vast, unforgiving universe overhead. They turned as one back towards the cluster of lights, the sanctuary they'd built together. It wasn't the ending Sarah had once dreamt of as a child seeking wonders in the cosmos. It was messier, bloodier, but in that imperfection lay its own stubborn, beautiful kind of hope. The galaxy was slow to change. Bureaucrats wrangled over the influx of refugees, opportunists circled with feigned altruism, and the Vrax retreated, a wounded beast waiting for another chance to strike. Yet the story of Earth, the haven for the weak, had taken root. It wasn't in grand speeches whispered through translator devices, but in the mundane acts of defiance that rippled outwards. A human engineer and a Lirin technician, heads bent together over a seemingly impossible fix for a battered freighter destined to carry medical supplies. Lirin music, once dismissed as primitive, finding an audience among jaded star pilots seeking solace after witnessing too much brutality. A human lawyer, fueled by equal parts coffee and compassion, exposing loopholes in interstellar labor laws that had ensnared countless vulnerable species. Sarah's observatory became a hub, its telescopes tracking not just stars, but the fragile network of beacons the Lirins created. It was an early warning system, but also a promise no cry for help would go unanswered, not while Earth and its allies could muster a response. One night, hunched over readings with a mix of exhaustion and grim satisfaction, Sarah was interrupted by an unexpected visitor. General Thorne, battle-worn, but with a glint in his eye, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Got a project for you, astronomer," he rumbled. "Not peering into space this time, but helping us build something new." The blueprints unrolled were a testament to insanity or genius, perhaps a mix of both. Orbiting stations designed with Lirin input, featuring habitats mimicking their lost homeworlds. It was a gesture both practical and potently symbolic. "Sanctuary," Thorne said simply, "needs more than just a place to land. It needs a place to belong." Years passed in a blur of the momentous and the mundane. A child born in the refugee camp, the first of its kind in this new, unfamiliar world, was greeted with hushed awe and a fierce protectiveness that transcended species. Arguments still raged in the idealism of sanctuary clashing with the practicality of intergalactic politics. But for every voice preaching isolation, another told stories plucked from the front lines. Of Lirin singers calming panicked crowds before violence erupted. Of human doctors and Lirin healers, their combined knowledge saving lives once deemed impossible. Sarah became less an astronomer, more an ambassador, traveling not just to star systems, but to the cramped quarters of spaceships, the bustling academies where a new generation was being shaped, and the negotiating halls where deals were brokered with feathers and handshakes. One star-strewn night, far from the familiar fields of Earth, Sarah found herself gazing outwards with Alarda. The Lirin was no longer the frightened youth she'd first encountered, but a leader, her feathers streaked with silver, the mark of age and wisdom within their kind. "You miss it, don't you?" Alara trilled softly. "The quiet of the stars." Sarah smiled, a hint of wistfulness in her gaze. "Sometimes, the stars were simpler." "But these," Alara gestured at the vastness before them, "these stars, they hold more now. Hope, however fragile, change, however painful, because of what we did. Because you," her voice faltered, then strengthened, "believed in us." Sarah felt the ghost touch of feathers against her hand, the Lirin gesture of solidarity. "I never did it alone," she said gently. "Courage isn't the absence of fear, Alara, it's acting despite it." Terrace's time came quietly. The elder Lirin, who'd borne witness to such unbearable loss, slipped away surrounded not by sterile medical equipment, but the soft light of an Earth sunrise and the trilled melodies of her surviving kin. Sarah, no longer the wide-eyed astronomer, but a seasoned diplomat with lines etched on her face, stood among the mourners. Humans and Lirins mingled, their shared grief surpassing any need for translation. It was there, in that moment of shared vulnerability, that the true legacy of their bold experiment hit Sarah. It wasn't the victories celebrated in news broadcasts, but this tangled weave of lives now inextricably intertwined. Human children, boisterous and bold, playing tag with young Lirins, their laughter sharp and hopeful. A weathered star freighter captain, his scarred face creased in a rare smile, sharing stories with a Lirin elder, the translator forgotten as they found a shared language in expressions and gestures. "We never set out to be saviors," Sarah murmured to Alara, who'd replaced Terrace at the forefront of their people. "And we never were," Alara replied, a quiet echo of the elder's wisdom in her tone. "But a sanctuary, perhaps, it saves those who built it as well." That night, Sarah ascended alone to the observatory. The stars seemed brighter, pulsing not with the promise of undiscovered worlds, but with the echoes of voices raised in protest, the hum of engines fueled by stubborn compassion, and the hesitant trills of a species finding its song again. Rumors started subtly. Whispers of strange lights on distant moons, distress calls garbled by unknown interference. The Vrax, true to Alara's prophecy, hadn't vanished, merely bided their time. Then it wasn't a rumor, but a chillingly formal declaration of renewed hostilities. Sarah found herself back in those tense strategy rooms, the faces grimmer, the stakes impossibly higher. Earth was no longer an underdog, but a target. The sanctuary they'd built, a beacon to the persecuted, was now a vulnerability the Vrax sought to exploit. Fear was a familiar enemy now, tempered by a cold resolve Sarah barely recognized in herself. She'd seen too much, lost too much to indulge in naive hope. Yet as the first refugee transport ships docked, not carrying the wounded, but those fleeing preemptive Vrax strikes, another emotion sparked within her. Defiant anger. They had dared to threaten her world, not just the planet, but the hard-won ideal it represented. It wasn't about defending Earth, but defending the very possibility of kindness in a galaxy that often seemed devoid of it. Addressing the On that time, Sarah didn't speak of surrender or heroic last stands. She projected images of the refugee camps, of children with hauntingly familiar eyes, of hybrid medical teams fighting tirelessly against a new strain of an old plague carried by the fleeing. "The Vrax want war," she said, her voice echoing in the vast chamber. "Well then, let them have it. But we won't fight on their terms, with fleets and starfighters alone. We will fight with every ounce of ingenuity, every act of compassion, every life we save. We become the haven the galaxy truly needs, and in doing so, we dare them to underestimate us again." The war that came wasn't the swift, brutal conquest the Vrax envisioned. It was a grinding stalemate, bleeding them slowly as allies won with whispers and well-timed aid began to rebel against their iron grip. Sarah crisscrossed the galaxy, not as a symbol, but as a strategist. Her weapon wasn't lasers, but knowledge gleaned from endless nights with Alara of Lirin mindscapes and the subtle vulnerabilities within the Vrax's vaunted focus. Each Lirin cry of disruption, amplified and honed, targeted not just troops, but the flow of information, the supply chains, the very lifelines upon which the Vrax empire depended. Earth's military fought valiantly, a shield buying time, but the true battle was waged in the shadows, an asymmetric war born of desperation and relentless belief. On a moon Sarah couldn't even pronounce, huddled in a command bunker with a force composed of battle-weary humans and avian guerrilla fighters, she watched the turning point unfold. A Vrax armada, sleek and deadly, paralyzed as their systems malfunctioned, commands dissolving into panic static. The Lirins struck then, not with brute force, but with surgical precision, exploiting the chaos. There was no glorious victory cry, simply the comms crackling with choked relief and the sight of retreating enemy ships. Sarah slumped to the ground, exhaustion washing over her in waves, and found a feathered wing draped gently over her shoulder in silent support. "It's not over," Alara trilled, weariness threading through the melody, "but we taught them fear, fear of their own weakness." Endings are deceptive in a galaxy teeming with life. The Vrax, diminished and fragmented, remained a threat, and new ones would undoubtedly emerge. Wars wouldn't cease, nor would the tide of the displaced and the desperate seeking sanctuary. Yet a shift had occurred, as undeniable as the realignment of constellations over epochs. Earth wasn't an anomaly anymore, but a blueprint, flawed and scarred yet undeniably potent. The orbiting sanctuary stations thrummed with activity, a motley blend of species learning to coexist amidst the echoes of lost worlds and the hopeful chaos of new beginnings. Sarah, her hair now predominantly silver, taught, not of stars, but of history. Of the day a frightened astronomer and a broken alien met in a cornfield, of the audacious belief that the weakest weapon could be kindness itself. Her students were an unruly mix. Human idealists, Lirins seeking to understand the strange allies who'd reshaped their destiny, and others from races Sarah was still learning about, drawn by the promise her world embodied. One evening, amidst the bustle of the classroom, built amidst the ruins of her old observatory, A young Lirin raised a hesitant hand. "Teacher," he trilled, his voice tinged with the melancholy that lingered within his kind. "If the Vrax return, if we fail again, was it all for nothing?" Sarah rested a hand on his feathered shoulder, feeling the fragile bones beneath, a reminder of all they'd endured. "Nothing that ignites change is ever for nothing," she said, her voice quiet but carrying the weight of lived experience. "Even if we fall, we leave behind a different galaxy than the one we were born into. One a little kinder, a little braver, a little less afraid to reach for the improbable." Alara, now an elder stateswoman in her own right, her feathers etched with the hard-won wisdom of relentless struggle, sought out Sarah in the rare moments of quiet. Their shared sanctuary wasn't just the orbiting stations, but a rooftop garden on Earth, a carefully cultivated echo of a lost Lirin world. "They will write histories of this," Alara murmured, the serenity tinged with a survivor's relentless ache. "Of battles and treaties. But I fear they'll miss the essence." Sarah, hands calloused from tending alien plants, looked up at her steadfast friend. "You fear they will forget it was ugly and painful and so very, very costly." Yes, Ilara's trill was a soft echo in the twilight, and that it was born from ordinary people doing extraordinary things. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the rustle of leaves in a man-made breeze. Then Sarah smiled, the creases a map of her journey. "They won't forget. We won't let them." Turning back to the Earth, she knelt, her fingers tracing the intricate lines of an unfamiliar script. "The Lirins have songs of mourning of lost homeworlds," she said slowly, "but they lack a melody for defiant hope. We'll teach them that." It began as a rumor, then a whisper echoing across the stars, a transmission originating from deep within Vrax territory, a language none could decipher, yet carried a haunting beauty that stirred a long-dormant unease in their reptilian hearts. Intelligence agencies scrambled, fear sparking amongst their ranks as the signal pulsed, relentless and unwavering. This wasn't a call to battle, but a haunting elegy, a lament that seeped into their warships and echoed in their rigid halls of power. It was Alara and her chosen, their voices forged in sorrow, amplified across the vast emptiness. The Lirin song held no threats, no calls for retribution. It was a requiem for the fallen, not just their own, but for the countless lives consumed by a war the Vrax had begun yet could no longer control. For the echoes of worlds turned to ash, the stolen laughter of children, the potential extinguished in the name of sterile conquest. The galaxy listened. Those victimized by the Vrax found solace in a shared grief finally acknowledged. The war-weary found cracks in their resolve, questioning the endless cycle of violence. And somewhere amidst the fortified heart of the Vrax Empire doubt flickered, not of defeat, but of the terrible hollowness of their victories. Sarah, surrounded by students, felt the shift before the newscast confirmed it. An unexpected quiet along the front lines, Vrax commanders hesitating, their once unquestioned orders faltering in the face of an onslaught of harmonious sorrow. "It's not a weapon," she explained to the puzzled faces around her. "It's a mirror. It forces them to confront the echo of their own devastation." Sarah grew old, not gracefully, but with a stubborn defiance that mirrored the spirit of the improbable sanctuary she called home. Her observatory was now a hub of communications, its focus not the distant heavens, but the fragile network of beacons they had spread across the stars. On nights stolen from her overwhelming duties, she'd ascend to the rooftop, where Alara, no less burdened but her feathers now starkly patterned with the silver of Lirin twilight, would join her. They'd sit in companionable silence under the tapestry of stars, the vastness once a promise of discovery, now a constant reminder of battles won and scars earned. "They're out there," Alara murmured one such evening. "My people, not many, but scattered, finding new havens, learning to sing anew." "And here," Sarah asked, the simple question encompassing a planet transformed, an unlikely alliance forged. "Here," Alara's voice held a melody of both hope and enduring sorrow. "Here we build, not a mirror of the past, but a testament to what we can become. Flawed, perhaps always on the cusp of war, but a place where the least likely of heroes might still be found," Sarah finished, the astronomer and the aliens sharing a smile under the eternal, uncaring stars. For the galaxy was far from healed. Wars would rage anew, the desperate would always seek shelter, and the powerful would forever prey on those deemed weak. But a story had been written among the stars, a testament whispered on star freighters, sung in refugee camps, and encoded in the defiant broadcast pulsing from Earth. It was the story of a haven built by uncommon valor and improbable kindness. And perhaps in that tale lay a blueprint for a galaxy where bravery didn't always require blasters, and the most potent weapon could be a stubbornly open heart.